Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. I am your host, as usual, Liam, or at the FSA Tweets on Twitter, and I'm joined by Rich at Dynasty Island on Twitter, my co-host. Rich, after even more crazy week 3 than week 2, how did your week go?
Yeah, I had a good week. I know it was a little bit mental, but yeah, I had a decent week in all. Finished in the positive in the wins column, which was good. I was 37-29 across all my leagues, so 56% win rate. So yeah, it was pretty good. What about you?
I actually haven't worked out my win rate, but I've been doing pretty well. I've lost in a lot of leagues that I was doing pretty well in, so that's not good, obviously. But my dynasty teams seem to be going the way that I want them to, whether that is rebuild in the ones that I'm rebuilding or absolutely being dominant. No, I'm joking. And just winning here and there. But Rich, let's get quickly to these high scorers because then there's just some names out there that we didn't expect to see in the top 3 at each position. So as normal, it is 4-point touchdown for quarterbacks and PPR for every other position. We don't do any fancy scoring, and we're just going to recap the top 3 from each position. So starting off at the quarterback position, Lamar Jackson outscored every other quarterback by 13 points, near enough, with over a 40-point showing this week. Jalen Hurts came in as QB2 with 27.6 points, and then Josh Allen with 26.7, so just behind Jalen Hurts. Rich, Lamar and Hurts at the top of the high scorers. I mean, we're going to talk about how Hurts is doing really well, but Lamar, I mean, he's playing for that contract right now, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible. It's the greatest start to a fantasy season for a quarterback ever, and it's the second greatest 3-game stretch in terms of fantasy points scored ever. So, you know, I think what he's doing in terms of from the pocket as a passer has been, you know, far superior to what I thought was capable and what was possible. His ability to progress through reads, sit in the pocket and find the right guy and add on to that the kind of rushing potential, it's been really impressive. I think he's up at like a 75% adjusted completion rate with an ADOT of 11, which is just wild. Normally when you're pushing the ball that far downfield, the completion percent is greatly reduced. So yeah, really impressive. And you know, it's hard to say anything other than it looks like it's going to continue.
I mean, when you throw Jalen Hurts in there, Rich, both of these guys had all of the rushing talent in the world, but the passing game was what everyone was questioning about. So what do you think there? Are you seeing a massive improvement from their passing game? Because personally, for me, when I've rewatched Jalen Hurts from last year compared to this year, from the few games that I have managed to watch, it feels like Jalen Hurts has improved massively. Have you seen anything for Lamar as well?
Yeah, I mean, Lamar's improved. His ability to work through his progressions is what I've been impressed with more than anything. I think, you know, the arm talent has always been there. But yeah, I think that his ability to go from 1 to 2 to 3 and find the right person before he's then escaping has absolutely kind of amazed me, really. And that's the biggest thing that I've seen is that improvement from the pocket from him.
So yeah, you've just thrown up a question on here, Rich, before I started talking about Hurts. Stocks has asked whether we're starting him in front of Allen. So I'm assuming that was Lamar when we were talking about Lamar. But are you starting either of those two quarterbacks, Hurts and Lamar, over Allen weekly at this point?
So I've not finished my ranks yet. So I've got option to change this at a later date. But at the moment, I've got Allen 1, Hurts 2, Lamar 3. Now that's mainly because the Ravens are 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, and the Bills are first. So that's more of a matchup thing than a Lamar over Josh Allen thing. I think that the Ravens are giving up an awful lot more fantasy points than the Bills defense. So yeah, I'd still pump with Josh Allen. Although let's be honest, stocks, I don't know what league that is in, but if you're having to decide between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, I'm hoping that's a 1 QB league. But if that's I'm not quite sure in what world you're being able to make that decision.
So moving on, Rich, running backs. A name that we kind of expect to be in here is Derrick Henry, but then starting off at running back 1 on the week overall was Khalil Herbert with nearly 31 points. That's 13.9 points. Derrick Henry, 25.3 points, RB2. And then Jamal Williams, 24.7 points, comes in at RB3. We've got 2, what you would essentially call backup running backs for fantasy purposes, in the top 3 here, Rich.
Yeah, Jamal Williams done it again, isn't he? We talked about him leading the league in goal line opportunities, and also getting a decent amount of targets as well. And he's done it again, isn't he? I think it was 2 goal line touchdowns that he scored at the weekend. But Khalil Herbert, I feel like we're kind of like a proud parent with Khalil Herbert. We've been hyping him for the last 18 months. We talked about how he was going to be the Bears' lead back next year, how he was a better player than David Montgomery, how the Bears just needed to realize that. And first opportunity he gets, he puts up 30.9 fantasy points. David Montgomery has never put up 30 fantasy points in his career. And Khalil Herbert does it in the first game that he's, this year that he's the true lead back. So, yeah, hopefully, we don't like to root for injuries. Hopefully David Montgomery is healthy, but hopefully this has shown the Bears enough that Khalil Herbert is now going to be here to stay. And if anything, he's at least a 1B to Montgomery's 1A, but hopefully they can continue to feed David Montgomery to Khalil Herbert. Sorry.
I mean, he had 157 rushing yards on only 20 attempts, which gives him over a 7 yards per carry, and also had 2 touchdowns. I will say it was against the Houston Texans defense, who is one of the worst run defenses coming into this week. I mean, yeah, as you said, we've been hyping him up. I won't take as much credit because you were way on him beforehand. But yeah, he's been absolutely insane. Monty's contract ends at the end of this year, I believe, Rich.
Yeah, he's a free agent at the end of the year. So that was where we were potentially hyping Herbert, saying that Montgomery's going at the end of the year. I can't believe that a rebuilding Bears team would re-sign Montgomery. So I think he's gone in free agency. And that was where the hope was that Herbert would take over. If it comes earlier than next year, I'm absolutely delighted. Although I'm a bit frustrated because a lot of my benches were very happy that Herbert did well on Sunday rather than my starting lineups.
I mean, it probably says more about my starting lineups, but I had Herbert starting in a few of my leagues, and I'm very glad that he was. So moving on to the wide receivers, Rich, Devonta Smith came in at 30.9 points as wide receiver 1. Matt Collins just behind him at 30 on the dot, and then Marquise Brown at 28 points. Now, Rich, Marquise Brown had 17 targets this week. I thought that was an insane stat line. He had just under a 30% target share. I mean, the Cardinals did throw the ball nearly 60 times, but what do you foresee for Marquise Brown going forward, especially when DeAndre Hopkins comes back into that offense?
I think that's the key point, and that was exactly why I wanted to talk on this. Look, this Cardinals offense is not well built. We've talked about Cliff Kingsbury several times. He is, in my eyes, a terrible head coach and a terrible offensive play caller. He doesn't call an offensive scheme. He calls a series of plays. And he basically lines his players up, gives a specific route concept, and then it's Kyler, go and make things happen. And that's where Marquise Brown ended up seeing 17 targets and the volume, because it's basically, oh, crap, we're losing this game. Kyler, go and do something. Now, that's all well and good when Kyler's the only competent wide receiver. When Greg Dortch, okay, I loved Greg Dortch coming out. He was a rookie model dream. Glad to see that he's finally coming to reality. But that's his target competition. We're going to add in potentially Rondale Moore this week, who Rondale Moore, say what you like, he's going to get targets and the way they're going to use him. And then you're adding DeAndre Hopkins in 3 weeks. I think if you're doing things right, I think you need to be exploring selling high on Marquise Brown, because I don't foresee this continuing over the next, 2 months. Yes, you might have a couple of good weeks before DeAndre Hopkins comes back, but if you wait to sell until week 5, everybody's going to go, oh, he's only selling Marquise Brown because DeAndre Hopkins is coming back. That's not in people's minds yet. I think if you can sell now before people start talking about Hopkins and thinking about Hopkins, that's your opportunity.
Moving over to the tight ends, Rich, Mark Andrews had another monster week at 28.9 points. David Njoku in Thursday Night Football had nearly 24 points. He was an absolute monster in that game. Travis Kelce had 17.9 points at tight end 3. David Njoku, is this his breakout week, Rich? Do you expect him to have this type of game? Maybe not 24 points every week, tight end 2, but do you expect him to be in the top 12 from now on?
Yes. I think David Montgomery is now in the reliable starter category. David Njoku. Sorry, I want to keep pounding on David Montgomery. I think David Njoku is now in the reliable starter category. I think that he's moved out of that optional streamer spot. I think from it feels like forever that it's taken him to come to fruition after he was drafted, but he's improved gradually, and I feel like now he's getting the opportunity. And at some point, Deshaun Watson is going to come back, and I feel like this offense is going to take a step forward. And if he can carve out that number 2 spot in this offense by playoff time, he could be a potential league winner, because that offense is going to take a step forward. If it is Amari Cooper 1, David Njoku 2, he's probably going to be a top 7 or 8 tight end by that point in the season.
So, Rich, let's move on to the significant news. This week, we've got some good news, but as usual, we always have some bad news. So let's start off with some good. We'll get into some not so good in a minute. Keenan Allen is on track to be back. He was late declared out for the games this week, but after that hamstring injury, he does look to be back on track this week. He's supposed to be starting his practicing, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But as I said, probably back this week. Mac Jones, unfortunately, on some bad news, has what looks to be a pretty severe high ankle sprain, and that's a quote from Ian Rappaport. So that is probably him out for a month, if not even longer than that. Dalvin Cook and David Montgomery together both left their respective games. Dalvin Cook with a shoulder injury looked to be dislocated, or it had been reported as dislocated afterwards. And then David Montgomery, see, I did it then, Rich, had his ankle rolled up on. Both are questionable for week 4. We don't know what's going to happen there. But Rich, Dalvin Cook, he's got this could be quite worrying for dynasty managers, especially with his injury history, especially around that shoulder.
Yeah, so I read a report today. It wasn't from the most reputable source, so I need to be careful what I'm saying here. The report basically said that he has a permanently torn labrum and his shoulder could pop out at any point.
That is
So, I mean,
strange.
of all the positions to play with a permanently torn labrum and a shoulder that could pop out, I'm not sure running back would be particularly high on my list. So yeah, consider, I've been banging the drum for getting rid of Dalvin Cook on your Dynasty rosters for the past year. Consider me absolutely terrified with that report, because if that is true, what's to say, maybe he misses week 4, maybe he comes back in a week. It's one hit and that shoulder could pop. Like, okay,
For sure.
I'm very, very concerned about it. And yeah, I think Alexander Mattison, he's a fantastic handcuff. He immediately steps into that RB2 category any week that Dalvin Cook's out. So yeah, if you've got Dalvin Cook, maybe wait till he plays and then sell, because if you sell when he's injured, you're not going to get a decent return, I think.
Dalton Schultz, who missed week 3, is a complete unknown for week 4. We just have no information right now. I think he's pushing to play, but that's what every team says about every player that missed the previous week, unless it's an obvious long-term injury. Amon-Ra St. Brown left the game with an ankle injury. Again, another unknown. Unfortunately, Tuesday injury news isn't full of knowledgeable information right now, but there is an opportunity that he misses week 4, Rich. That's going to be a massive blow to the Lions offense, especially one that's been clicking with Amon-Ra St. Brown as the focal point.
Yeah, everything I've read says encouraging. Like, what does an encouraging report on an ankle injury mean? It means nothing.
Not broken.
Ankle injury is always a concern. If it's a high ankle sprain, we're talking 4 to 6 weeks. Look, I saw a mock draft startup today where Amon-Ra St. Brown went it was a 1 QB startup, and Amon-Ra St. Brown went number 4 overall as the wide receiver 3. So it went Jefferson, Chase, Jonathan Taylor, and then St. Brown. Now, I've come round to Amon-Ra St. Brown, but if you could get that sort of price with Jameson Williams floating in the background, with him potentially currently injured, do we need to talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown as a must sell if that's the potential price that's being floated around?
I think we need to start talking about him as a sell, because people putting him in that top 5, top 10 wide receiver range, and if they've got him there in Dynasty, I'm selling. I was completely wrong on him in the offseason. I didn't think that he was going to hold up this focal point he has. So I'm going to happily admit that I was wrong. But when it comes to Jameson Williams, who I was massively high on pre-draft and post-draft, I don't think he's going to come back and light the world on fire for the Lions straight away. But I also don't think he's going to be completely ignored and used as a deep threat just because of his speed. So I want to see how Amon-Ra St. Brown deals with that extra target, because at the moment there's not really a whole lot there. There's obviously Swift, who's been getting targets, Hawkinson that's been getting some, but wide receiver wise there's nothing else there, so he's sweeping all of that up.
Josh Reynolds, who had over 200 air yards this last week, that's as soon as Josh Reynolds becomes Jameson Williams, I think this offense is leaning in a slightly different direction.
So moving on, we've got Michael Thomas left the game with a toe injury, but from what I've seen, that he's not expecting to miss any time, and just something to consider. I've lumped these two together as Dak Prescott and Chris Godwin. So both could be returning as soon as week 5. So not this week coming up, but next week. Obviously Dak with that thumb injury and Godwin with that hamstring injury. That would be good news for a lot of Dynasty rosters. I know I'm missing Dak from a few rosters, so I need him back. Brian Robinson, this is a feel-good story for everyone that has seen the story. Back just before the season started, he was shot multiple times in, and I quote, the lower extremities. Now, he was seen back on the field during warm-ups before the Washington Commanders game this week. and we could see him as early as week 5. Rich, he's on the, I believe it's the NFI list, the non-football injury list, and I think from my research, the earliest he comes back or can come back from being on that preseason is week 5. So it's looking good, especially considering that horrible story that we heard in the preseason. And then DeAndre Swift, we saw a report today from Ian Rappaport saying that he could potentially sit for a few weeks and rest up his shoulder that's been plaguing him with a bit of issue. So just something to look out for, especially if that means Jamal Williams is getting the boatload of those carries as well as the goal line touches that we've mentioned already. Rich, that is all the significant news. So let's move on to the Dynasty stock market. Who do you have as a riser this week?
So I feel like he's been a riser every week. Perhaps not in this section, but I guess overall value. And it's Jalen Hurts. He just keeps doing it. He keeps impressing. If we're going to add in a second elite receiving weapon with Devonta Smith on top of AJ Brown, I think we need to have a conversation. Jalen Hurts, he's now in my top 5 Dynasty QBs. I think there is no world in which the Eagles don't commit to him next year. That was, we talked about it in the preseason, didn't we? Where if we knew he was the starting quarterback in 2024, he'd be a top 5 Dynasty QB. Well, I'm now of the opinion that I think he is definitely going to be a starting quarterback of the Eagles in 2024. So,
unless he massively falls off, Rich, I don't foresee him ever giving up that starting role this year.
I think if he went on a shocking run for the next 13 games and, fell off a cliff, I think he's now shown enough that the Eagles can see that he's the starter for next year. I've got him ahead of Kyler. I've got him ahead of Burrow. He's in that tier with Justin Herbert for me right now.
And then, Rich, I'm going to specify that you put this one on this list so I don't look like a massive homer, but you've put Romeo Doubs on here. You've put, is he the Packers wide receiver 1? Now, I will say Sammy Watkins is now on the IR. He went on just before the game this week. Yeah, huge shocker. But he's now on IR, which means that Dobbs is there to step up. I think Lazard is still going to be the favourite target, especially around the end zone for Aaron Rodgers. But that being said, I think that Dobbs has got this starting role now, and he's not going to give it up very easily, especially for when Christian Watson comes back, because he was out. He was inactive for the game this week with an injury. So I think Watson can still become something, and I'm just excited for both of those receivers for the future at least. But yeah, at the moment, Romeo Doubs is probably the upside play in the Packers offense from the wide receiver position. But otherwise, I think for real NFL, probably looking at Aaron Rodgers throw into Lazard as the safety net, if not the running backs.
Yeah, I think anytime a rookie day 3 wide receiver is running 95% of routes in week 3, I think it's noteworthy. I'm not there yet with him. I like him. I was really impressed with him on Sunday, but I'm not there to kind of go all in and think that he's the answer. I'd still want to see another week, and if that means I'm going to be late to the party and it's going to cost me more to acquire him, then so be it. But I don't know if there's enough there for him to be thrown in that top 36 wide receiver bracket. He's still at
it's not there for me either.
Wide receiver 50 plus for me at the moment. So yeah, I'm happy just sitting back and saying, show me a bit more first.
Rich, and then you've got the fallers here. The first one on the list, DJ Moore. I mean, what a start for DJ Moore of the season. This is not what Dynasty managers were expecting, were they?
No. I was very much expecting a huge season from DJ Moore, and he's so far disappointed. I think Baker's probably the best quarterback that he's had of his career so far. and Baker's been absolutely terrible this year. But this is a guy he's put 3 consecutive top 25 seasons. He's quarterbacks in that time. Kyle Allen, Cam Newton, Will Greer, Teddy Bridgewater, PJ Walker, Sam Darnold. I still believe in the talent.
Let me just point out, Teddy was actually the best of those. That says everything about the type of quarterbacks he's had.
I still believe in the talent. I think that on Sunday he was shadowed. So every single time the Saints played man coverage, Marshawn Lattimore was on DJ Moore. Marshawn Lattimore, we've seen him take away more receivers before for games at a time. I think if you can use this opportunity to go and buy low on DJ Moore, I think it's a sensible move. I'm hopeful that whilst his value is falling, it's about to bounce back.
What you've also got to remember is in week 1 they went again. The Panthers played against the Browns, who absolutely took away Elijah Moore against the Jets. So that seems to be their type of MO right now, where they're just taking away a top target. So he has played against some defenses that can just take away that top target and not leave the quarterback with his, I'd assume, favorite target from Baker, but I don't really know how that's playing out right now. Moving on, Rich, you've got Kyler on this list as well. I mean, I'm just going to leave the floor to you. You've said that Hurts has overtaken him in your rankings, but where's Kyler falling for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, Kyler's still 6. Let's not panic too much.
I'm not saying he's fallen too far.
No, but I think, look, he's not produced from a stats perspective that we'd hope. I think, we've talked a couple of times, Liam, in the off season about not having DeAndre Hopkins in his stats when targeting every other receiver not named DeAndre Hopkins weren't that particularly impressive, and we've seen it so far this year. He's struggling from a touchdown perspective. His touchdown rate is very low. I'm frantically trying to look it up because I didn't actually make a note. He's at 2.1% touchdown rate, which the only quarterbacks with a lower touchdown rate are Mac Jones, Mitchell Trubisky, and Russell Wilson. So, that says everything you need to know there. He is getting DeAndre Hopkins back in 3 weeks. I think that is going to help this offense as a whole. And I think that if you can buy low on Kyler, hopefully there's going to be some touchdown regression coming. Hopefully there's going to be, some new horses coming into the stable with Rondale Moore and DeAndre Hopkins. So, yes, Kyler is a faller. He has to be because of the way he's played over the last couple of weeks. But I think there's some hope there.
You've got Justin Jefferson on this list, which I'm assuming that a lot of listeners have just gasped at you putting Justin Jefferson on here, but I can totally see why. I mean, if the Packers did what either of the past 2 teams have done, the Lions, and my mind's blanking on who they've just played for some reason.
They played the Lions this last week.
The Lions and the Eagles, sorry, those are the 2 teams. But if they had done anything like the Lions and the Eagles did, Justin Jefferson wouldn't have gone off absolutely massively against us. We played zone all game and we weren't covering him whatsoever. I mean, there were a couple of snaps where Preston Smith lined up over him in the slot, which is ridiculous. But the past 2 games, Eagles put Darius Slay on him for the most of that game. And absolutely bottled him up for Justin Jefferson standards when Darius Slay was covering him. I believe I saw a stat that was not very good for Justin Jefferson catches. And then this week against the Lions, again, the defense adjusted. And I mean, you can see that within his fantasy points and his fantasy production.
Yeah, so he was doubled on, or saw double coverage on every single route other than 8 on Sunday. The Lions, it was very impressive. They basically stuck a safety over the top. If he ran deep, the safety was over the top, giving corner help. If he ran a crossing route, the safety on the other side of the field came down to double him. It was, it was really impressive schematically. It took the Vikings far too long to realise what they were doing and start looking elsewhere. But you've got to worry when a player like Justin Jefferson is being able to be taken out of the game like that. And look, I think Justin Jefferson is, an elite talent. I think he's arguably one of the best receivers in the league. I expect him to bounce back. I expect him to be putting up those monster stat lines like he did in week 1. But I wouldn't be shocked if we didn't see another week or two this season where he does get taken out. And I think that Kevin O'Connell needs to have a long look at himself and go back and look at the film and try and start scheming up more interesting ways to get Justin Jefferson open. Because if teams are just going to double him every single snap, they need to have some sort of counter.
Well, there you go, Kevin O'Connell. If you are listening to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast, Rich at Dynasty Island, in case you want to go subtweet him, has told you need to go and have a long look at yourself. But let's move over to another NFC North team. You've got Darnell Mooney. I mean, that passing offense from the Bears hasn't been good whatsoever. They haven't allowed Fields to open it up. Those pass plays aren't there. But Fields still hasn't completed double-digit. He hasn't had double-digit completions all season through 3 weeks, which is incredible. I don't understand how that happens. But then Darnell Mooney's just not seeing those targets and not getting those completions. They're going elsewhere, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can sit here and talk about target share as much as you like, but a 25% target share when you're averaging 15 passes a game is not particularly interesting. An interesting nugget I read today was that the Jets have targeted running backs and tight ends 22 times a game, and the Bears have attempted 17 passes a game total. So, it's absolutely insane. Regression has got to set in. The Bears have got to start passing the ball more. You'd expect Mooney to bounce back, but look, this is the problem when we hype up a situation and say he's the only person that's going to get targeted in an offense. Yeah, but the offense isn't going to be any good. So, look, he's the only person in the league that has got a target share north of 22% that doesn't have a single week as a top 36 receiver. So, if people are completely panicking and, you can buy him dirt cheap, then yeah, I'd probably be interested, but I'm not going out and buying Darnell Mooney because I think there's going to be, fairly common that there's going to be weeks like this. I'm certainly not feeling comfortable starting him pretty much anywhere at the moment.
So, Rich, let's move over to the player of the week. We'll start with you because why not? Who have you got as your player for this week?
My player is Trevor Lawrence. He had a really impressive game on Sunday. So 262 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, finished with 25.2 points as the QB4. I think this is it. I think Trevor Lawrence has arrived. We talked about it week 1, I believe, after the week 1 review show, where we said, look, Trevor Lawrence, I was really impressed with him week 1. And I think that's it. I think he is now an elite talent that we expected. I'm all in on him. I'm all in on this offense, and I think that you've just got to believe that he's going to go from strength to strength. He has shown me so much. I think the most impressive thing is the speed at which he can get from receiver 1 to receiver 2. It's mind-blowing how quickly he gets through those progressions. And he's got all the arm talent that you could dream of. So, yeah, I'm all in. I think he's a elite option. And I think he's back in the top 10 in terms of dynasty quarterbacks, maybe even sneaking a little bit higher.
I like Trevor Lawrence. We were both on him as a bounce back candidate. He probably wasn't ever there under Urban Meyer just because of that whole situation. But Doug Peterson looks like he's figured out how to make this team run. I mean, they just absolutely smashed the Chargers in points and everything else. I mean, some of that might come down to Herbert and his rib injury, but I mean, when the when the Jags are putting up 38 points on a very difficult, very tough Chargers defense, to me that signals that he has taken that step forward from an NFL point of view. Fantasy production always will carry on with that. You very, very, very rarely see bad or quarterbacks on bad teams produce very well in fantasy. I want to go away and have a look at those stats now, just to see how that works. But yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence, especially with his newfound prime target in Christian Kirk. I mean, James Robinson is working in that run game. I like this Jaguars team. I didn't like it last year, quite obviously, but this year, especially for fantasy production, they've been absolutely incredible through 3 weeks. My player is a guy that I believe both of us were high on, higher than consensus going through the preseason. And that is Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. This week, he had an incredible game. He had 12 targets. He caught 8 of them, received 169 yards and a touchdown. But there's a few things that I wanted to talk about. First, we'll start off with the Eagles. I mean, Rich, we both said that we don't think AJ Brown is going to come in and just be the only guy there. We did both think that, or at least I'm probably putting words in your mouth now because I'm doubting myself a little bit here, but I definitely was saying that Devonta Smith wasn't going to just fade out of any game plan and he was still going to put up points. Didn't think it was going to be to this extent. I'll be honest. I still thought that wide receiver 24 was in his range of outcomes, but he's been incredible so far this season.
Yeah, he's been fantastic. I think I always felt like he'd be a bit boom bust just because I thought the nature of Jalen Hurts as the quarterback, AJ Brown coming in as a lead weapon, thought he'd have some good weeks, thought he'd have some shocking weeks. I think the key for him going forward is going to be consistency, isn't it? Is that can he command a solid, 6-7 targets per game, give you at worst that sort of 10, 12 point weeks and then throw in the odd 25. I think that's the key, isn't it? Is that hopefully he can provide that floor and not just be a boom bust flex option as such.
But the other thing I wanted to touch on, as you said, you expected some volatility, so did I. But both AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, apart from that first week for Devonta Smith, have seen a good floor of 10 to 15 point PPR points at least. Obviously, you had that first week for Devonta where he had no points because he didn't catch a ball. But I think that says everything you need to know about what that offense is going to be like. And then something else that I wanted to kind of touch on was the opponent that Devonta Smith just put up 30 points, I believe it was, 31 points. They did it against the Washington defense. Now, the Washington defense allowed 41 points to Amon-Ra St. Brown and 20 points to Christian Kirk. Rich, do you think that's some sort of trend right now? Because I quite like CD. I mean, we obviously like CD Lamb before, but I quite like CD Lamb as an extreme high ceiling play for this week because of this trend that we're kind of seeing through 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think the Washington defense is terrible. I think start all options you can against Washington defense. It's a joke, isn't it? So yeah, I expect plenty of wide receivers to have big days against Washington. I think that Washington's offense probably going to put up some decent points playing in garbage time as they have for every week other than this last week against the Eagles. So yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking about many options through the later year that have had massive games against Washington, because unless Chase Young coming back in a few weeks is going to completely change the defense, it's not looking pretty.
Rich, second to our final segment, we've got the flex off competition that we're both doing head to head this week. So for those that are listening for the first time, me and Rich go head to head in picking a player in flex consideration for your fantasy teams. So the way that it works is we look at Fantasy Pros ECR, which is expert consensus rankings for the week coming up. And we can't pick anyone inside the top 36 wide receivers, top 24 running backs, top 12 tight ends. Just scoring wise, it is PPR. There's no special scoring or anything. So first week, I went Drake London and pulled the win there. Rich, this week, it was a lot closer. So we ran a poll on at 5 Yard Dynasty. So if you want to take part in the Flex Off poll to pick who you think is going to win out of me and Rich that week, go ahead over to there. The poll will be out on Fridays. But Rich, we ran that poll for this week. It was Chris Olave, which was your pick, and my pick of Tyler Boyd. And you had a 91.3% following in that poll.
People were in agreement, and the people were right.
And 91% of people were actually right, but it wasn't as far as you would expect. So Chris Olave scored 23.7 fantasy points last week. He had a great week. And then my Tyler Boyd came in at 20.5 points, so only 3 points difference. But Rich does take that win, so it is 1-1 in the rankings right now. With that being said, Rich, who do you have as your flex off player for week 4?
So I felt that, look, let's continue the trend. We've called the Drake London breakout game. We've called the Chris Olave breakout game. So let's go and call the Treylon Burks breakout game. He's got a really interesting matchup. I think he's probably going to see Stephon Gilmore quite a lot on Sunday, which is going to be interesting. Obviously, Stephon Gilmore, former Defensive Player of the Year, but not quite the player he was, but he's still a big physical corner. And it'll be interesting to see what Treylon Burks does. Burks has increased the number of routes he's run every single week. Last week, he ran 95% of routes. I think that for Tennessee to basically get back to playoff contention, they need to ride their studs. And I think that Robert Woods, sadly, as much as I love him, is no longer that. And I think it's going to be Derrick Henry and Treylon Burks. And I think they need to start force feeding the ball to Burks. And look, if the breakout is ever going to come, it's got to come in these next couple of weeks. So yeah, I've got Treylon Burks, who's currently wide receiver 43.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And I want it to happen because I think Burks is going to break out at some point. I don't know whether it's this week, but as you said, it's a good matchup for him. My player, Rich, I'm going to go with the guy that you were massively high on all the way through rookie models, rookie season. You weren't happy when the Jets drafted him. So I'm giving you a bit of a dilemma here. Do you cheer on your guy, especially on your team, or are you cheering against him? That's Breece Hall. So in ECR rankings, he is RB 31 for this week, which surprised me. I thought it'd be a little bit higher. He's slowly been gaining points in PPR. So he's being used in that passing game. I mean, this last week we saw Michael Carter not be used as much as he has been used in the first 2 weeks. I mean, Breece Hall had 11 targets, I believe it was. He had double-digit targets. So has he clawed that 1A role away from Carter? I think he has at this point, just through 3 weeks, which is incredible for him, considering how good Carter was last year for the Jets. And then when you look at his matchup, Rich, Pittsburgh actually at the moment are one of the worst defenses for fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think that if Breece Hall is going to have a breakout game, I think this is going to be a great game for him. If not, I think that he's also got a very good floor to basically seal the deal if Burks doesn't do very well this week, which is what we've kind of seen from him in the past few weeks.
Yeah, I think he's a good call. I love Brees Hall. I think Minka Fitzpatrick is also in the concussion protocol, so I think that's interesting that the Steelers could be without him, which is obviously a massive hole on that defense. So yeah, very interested to see what Brees Hall does this week. It's the first week, again, not finalised my rankings, but at the moment it's the first week I've ranked Brees Hall over Michael Carter. So.
Well, he has been gaining fantasy points, so he scored 9 in the first week, 13 in the second week, and then 15 last week. And that's all without a touch. Oh, no, sorry. Week 2 was with a touchdown. But in the other 2 games, he was used a lot in the passing game. So I'm expecting that, especially from this Pittsburgh team, sorry, Rich, I'm kind of expecting the Pittsburgh team to go up early and force you to throw a little bit.
Trubisky at quarterback, you reckon?
Yeah,
they're going to go up early?
I think he's going to do something, and he's going to start throwing the ball deep. We said this last week, but I think
the big question mark for the Jets is that Zach Wilson should be back this week. So look, we've had Captain Check down at quarterback now for 3 weeks, and who's thrown an obscene amount of passes to the running backs and tight ends. Is that going to continue with Zach Wilson, or is it going to be more of the offense that we saw last year with Zach Wilson pushing that ball down the field a little bit more often?
So remember, guys, go over to @5yard Dynasty on Friday. There will be a tweet sent out, and it'll be a poll, so you can join in and pick which side you're on. And let's try and make it a bit more even this week. I don't want to be in the minority of less than 10% again. Even though you were right as a populace, it wasn't as close as that poll made out. Rich, this week we do have listener questions, so let's head over to the mailbag. So first of all, we've got 3 questions all around rebuilding. So Ali has asked, who is your favorite buy for a rebuilding team and for a competing team? But then Tarek also asked about rebuilding. So we'll start off with the favorite buy for rebuilding, and then we'll kind of progress through these questions a little bit quickly.
Yeah, I'm aiming these at Superflex. So favorite buy for a rebuilding team, I think you've got to go young elite quarterback. We talked about him already. Trevor Lawrence, I think, get in now before the price skyrockets. For a competing team, I think you can't go much worse than Jalen Hurts right now. I think he's still acquirable. Is that a word? He's still able to be acquired.
It may not be a word, but you can make it a word, right?
Yeah, I'll make it a word. I think, as I said, he's a top 5 dynasty QB for me, but I don't think people are there with him yet. So I reckon you can get in. And let's be honest, if you're a competing team in a Superflex league, the quarterbacks are what drives it most of the time. You know, they're the ones that score the big points. They're the big producers. I think that's what you need to get. If you're not elite at those 2 quarterback spots, you're probably not a true contender.
Rebuilding teams, I'm probably looking at a guy like I had the name and it's just dropped out of my head, like Christian Watson or a Sky Moore that hasn't really shown as a rookie yet, and people are probably lower on him and probably looking to get out. And you can try and take that shot at a cheaper price than what it would have cost at draft time. Competing wise, I quite like Christian Kirk right now, but I don't think anyone's selling for less than a first, which is surprising. I saw a trade go down, which was Kirk for a first. I mean, there are a few other pieces to even it out a little bit, but it was still basically Kirk for a first.
Wow.
Rich, moving on, but keeping on track with the rebuilding questions, can you blow up a team too early? And what do you do if said blow up team or said blown up team gets to the playoffs? For me, yes, you can. I don't know how you feel, Rich, but if you do get to the playoffs with a blown up team, I think that it shouldn't be a blown up team anymore, and you should have been making moves when you knew that you were getting close to the playoffs that put you in a good position to make the push to the championship.
Yeah, I think people look. Let's be honest. Rebuilding and blowing it up is quite fun, isn't it? And I think people are too quick sometimes to pull the trigger. It's a conversation that I've had a few times. I think it's good. You want to blow it up as soon as possible, but you want to wait as long as you can to make sure you are definitely not in contention. Which sounds a bit like an oxymoron, but in my head it kind of makes sense in that you don't ever want to blow it up and then find yourself in this spot. So if you've done that and you've gone, right, I'm blowing it up, either you've not blown it up properly or you've probably pulled the blow up button too quickly. And when I say blow it up properly, I think the best thing to do when you're blowing it up is to basically blow up one position. And I think that if you can look at, say, for example, a running back, you want to build a roster that is built for next year because, I as I said a lot, I don't believe in longer than 1 year rebuilds. You want to try and build your assets across the roster so that you're set to compete outside of that one position. And then, if it's running back, you can have a good quarterback, have a good receiver room, have a competent tight end. And then in one off season, you can just target running back to put you back into that competing window. And I think too often people try and blow up their entire team and then it takes them 3 years to rebuild. And actually what you should be doing is not just saying, I'm going to sell this one piece because he's old. And it's about trying to think slightly outside the box.
So Rich, Paul, one of the 5 Yard Dynasty writers at Paul_Picken, has asked if you're looking ahead into week 4 and you're 0-3, what are you doing to help you rebuild? First of all, Paul, I know that you're in this position. I'm not going to let you get away with that question and not mention that you're 0-3 in one of the leagues that both me and Rich are in with you. So I feel like you're asking for our advice on a league that we're in together. But I'm happy to give it to you. To start with, if you're 0-3, I always want you to go and check the points for and see what your scores are like for the past 3 weeks. Because if you're 0-3, but you've had the most points put against you, then are you really in a rebuild? You've just had a bad start with a bad schedule. Yes, it doesn't look great, but if you're in that situation, that's a tough situation to be in. If you are genuinely at the bottom end of the scoring spectrum, and I'm talking from a position where I know that Rich is in agreement with the way that people should do draft orders, where the people that don't make or the teams that don't make the playoffs, the draft order is set in reverse standings of max points that could possibly be scored. If it's on Sleeper, you can look at that through Max PF. There's a column that you can sort in the league standings. So if you're in a league such as that, then always look at max points for, because that gives you an idea of how good your team actually has been versus how good your opponents have been, whether they've just had that lucky boom week. But Rich, specifically to being 0-3 and helping you rebuild, if you do choose to go down that route, what is the first thing you kind of think of there?
So this is something I've been toying with over the past few weeks, and I think everybody can sit here, and everybody listening to this podcast probably knows the way to traditionally rebuild is, you sell off your running backs, you buy into young wide receivers, you buy into young quarterbacks, you get future draft picks, and you rebuild that way. Well, everybody's doing that. And if, yes, the 2023 class is supposed to be special, and yes, we're trying to acquire as many of those draft picks as possible. But if everybody is trying to do the same thing, you're never going to differentiate yourself to become a contender other than a little bit of luck, or maybe you draft a little bit better in next year's rookie draft. And again, you get a bit of luck. And for me, I don't like relying on luck. So I think that in that situation, Paul, I think you need to start thinking outside the box. And I think you need to start taking perhaps some calculated risks on guys that you think could potentially spin a profit and raise your overall roster value that aren't traditional rebuild moves. So I wrote in the offseason about going out and buying DeAndre Hopkins because his price was dropped, and in 3 weeks you could then sell him for a profit on what you paid in the offseason, because as soon as he's back on the field, people are going to realize, oh, DeAndre Hopkins is still really good. That's the kind of thing that I think if you're rebuilding, you need to not think about, I only want players that are going to be on my team when I'm competing in 2 years' time. What you need to be thinking is, can I make small moves to rise my overall roster value, or can I make a move that I can spin for a profit in 6 months? I think that going out and buying 2023 seconds is a good move, because I think people don't realize quite how deep this class is going to be. But I also think take some calculated risks, as Liam said earlier, on some of those rookies that you might perhaps like, that could, turn into something down the line, whether that's Sky Moore or Christian Watson, or, there's hundreds of other, Trey McBride, someone like that. I also think that, traditional rebuild, you're looking at selling off as many as your running backs as possible, because they're a position that's got a short shelf life. So maybe you go out and you buy a load of backup running backs. We've talked about Khalil Herbert in the last week. His value has probably doubled. He's probably gone from being worth less than a second to, being worth more than a second right now. Can you go out?
Pollard's another good example there.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with Tony Pollard is that he's a free agent at the end of the year, so it's a little bit more uncertain there. But could you go out and buy, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, Isaiah Spiller? Could you go out and buy, I'm really struggling to think.
You're really struggling for backup running backs.
But there's plenty of other potential backup running backs that could turn into something if there's an injury. Could you go out and buy Rashad White? Young, potential rookie running back. If there's a Leonard Fournette injury, his price is going to go up. Could you go and buy your guy, Kenny Gainwell? Those are the kind of moves that...
buy Kenny Gainwell.
But yes, you're buying young players, but it's not about going out and buying those young players. You could potentially buy, Gus Edwards. If Gus Edwards come back and he's healthy and there's another J.K. Dobbins injury, could Gus Edwards turn into profit? And I think that's the mindset you need to have, is not just looking at, I only want players on my rosters that are going to help me in 2024 or 2023, whenever you're aiming to rebuild. Start looking for small wins. Start looking for players that could turn a profit. And that's the way that you're going to increase that overall roster value and get you in a position to compete sooner than 3 years down the line by blowing it up and just getting rookie picks and doing it that 3-year recycle way.
Rich, quickly, we've got Paul Squires asking, is it time to cut our losses on Albert O? And then quite similarly, what is your biggest panic cut that you can try and take advantage of if someone is panicking or in those shallower leagues already cutting ties with, similar to a situation like Albert O?
Yeah, I mean, look, Albert O's not been great. He's been pretty poor. But I think that whole, I almost said Seattle, that whole Denver offense has been pretty poor. I'd wait on Albert O. He's not been what I'd hoped. I know I'd hoped, and it's looking like that's the one of the players that I've got wrong. He's still running the route on over 60% of pass plays. He's still getting a decent targets per route rate. He's at like 13%. I'd like to see that tick up a little bit, close towards 20, but wait, if we're still having this conversation in 2-3 weeks' time, then yeah, maybe look at moving on to Albert O. Hopefully your dynasty leagues are big enough that you can still roster Albert O without getting into too much trouble. In terms of panic cut, I struggle with this because I'll be honest, most of the dynasty leagues I play in are deep and basically nobody gets cut. The only time anybody's adding anyone off the waiver wire is because somebody's going on to IR. So yeah, maybe someone cut like Darnell Mooney or somebody like that. So yeah, I struggled to come up with a cut. Have you got any suggestions?
No, as you said, I'm in many leagues where when someone picks someone up, I have to go and research who that player is because you probably haven't heard of him too often. I mean, I'm talking guys like Richie James that had a bunch of targets week one and has kind of carried that on. Mac Hollins is another one that just had a massive week this week. Guys like that are just coming up out of nowhere. So cuts wise, probably not picking any guys up that are being cut when you picking guys like that up. But I like that Darnell Mooney call in terms of someone that has fallen.
I've got a couple that I've just thought maybe you could get maybe some of the rookies. Maybe someone's moved on from like an Isaiah Spiller or Pierre Strong who hasn't done anything so far this year. Maybe it's someone like a Danny Gray or a Khalil Shakir who I've not got high hopes for. But if it's the 27th, 28th person on your roster, they're well worth that roster spot. So yeah, I'd look at draft capital and age and try and take some flyers. Could it be David Bell or someone like that?
And then the final question we've got, Rich, is from Jack. So he's asked, what is the GOAT cocktail? Now, if you don't mind, Rich,
that's all you mate. Please do.
So I had a quick research, Jack. The GOAT cocktail, from what I could find, there is actually a cocktail called the GOAT, which is 1 shot vodka, 1 shot tequila, 1 shot rum, and 1 splash of Tabasco sauce, which doesn't sound very nice in my opinion. So that is the actual GOAT cocktail from what I can see from a quick research. My GOAT cocktail, so greatest of all time, will be the classic daiquiri, which is lime rum and sugar syrup or sugar, however you want to make that. It's just my favorite. I don't know how else to explain that. Do you have a GOAT cocktail?
Yeah, gin and tonic. That's me sorted. There you go.
How boring of you, Rich.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was thinking of trying to make something with the name and make a cocktail myself, but I just couldn't think of one in the short amount of time, Jack. So maybe I'll come back to you and I'll DM you.
Gin, Oasis, avocado, and tequila. There you go.
Yeah, I was thinking something along the lines of gin, orange juice.
Why didn't I think of orange juice? Why didn't I think of orange juice beginning with O? Why? Yeah,
it's one of the most common cocktail ingredients. Orange juice was one of the first things. Amaretto and tequila, but I have no idea how that's going to work together because there's some different flavors in there. But yeah, Jack, classic daiquiri. If you haven't tried one, go for it. Strawberry daiquiri if you're feeling not lime and a different flavor. So, guys, that is all we have on the show sheet. So that's all we have on the show for you. As usual, you can find the live stream at 5 Yard Dynasty if you're not listening to this live. At 8 o'clock, that is UK time, so 3 p.m. Eastern, every Tuesday, and it's going to be out on a podcast if you are listening live. Get your listener questions over to us at 5 Yard Dynasty. That tweet goes out every Monday, and vote on our poll as well for the Flex Off competition. So it's Treylon Burks versus Breece Hall this week. Please vote for me a little bit more, guys. I don't want an 8% showing again, which I have a feeling this time I don't think I'll have an 8% showing, Rich. But yeah, have a vote on that. That'll be out on Friday. So until next week, guys, that is everything from us. So please stay safe and we'll see you then.